Yes.
Can you talk about the workflow of your career? How did you end up here from the moment you graduated with an affinity and enthusiasm for these sorts of tools?
Completely by mistake, actually, to be quite honest. Like everybody else, I sat in an office, you know, with my ass pounded every day by everyone in existence, worked my butt off. You know, when my kids were born, I went into the office at 4 o'clock because, you know, my kid was screaming and wanting milk, and I figured, well, what the hell, I'm awake, I may as well go. And, you know, came home at midnight, ate dinner. My wife is here, so she'll be able to corroborate that. And I got to a point where I thought, yeah, this is great, but really I'm kind of really interested in that more specified area. So, you know, I went to work for a company that did custom fabrication stuff, and that's all they did, right? And, you know, at first it was, so there was a people conflict there, which was ultimately which led to me leading. But what originally my purpose for being there was to work on these things and do exactly, ironically, exactly what I do now in my own company, but at somebody else's company. And what it ended up being was all project management. And so it was, essentially I was hired as a token, hey, we understand you because we have one of you, sort of situation, right? So, you know, like my architects or my clients are architects actually, which is kind of weird, right? That was our client, and so it was, you know, this guy understands everything that you guys are trying to achieve. So, you know, that's all we're trying to do. So effectively, I thought, okay, you know, that's great too. That was a normal 9 to 5. It was completely different, actually, in that sense, because you actually left at normal hours, and I thought, I should be doing more. Why am I only working 9 to 5? This is weird. So, you know, I left there, and I went back to working at a normal architecture firm again. And I realized that after going back, that was definitely not what I wanted to do. So an opportunity came, which was essentially architecture, and it was a chance for me to do my own building. And so I thought, well, I should just establish my own firm and just jump on that and say, take this project, and then, you know, I'll figure it out. I'll get more projects. Well, that kind of ended up going okay, but I thought, yeah, it's still the same stuff. I mean, there's got to be something more. So what actually happened was the first project, which we actually just completed, I guess, well, it's still ongoing, but our component was completed as of February, literally just kind of fell in my lap. You know, a guy called me one day and said, hey, I hear you do really weird stuff. You've worked at, you know, Walters, which does all of this custom stuff. You know, would you consider basically just, I'll build it, I'll erect it, can you do everything else? And I thought about it. I thought, well, that's a tremendous amount of liability and responsibility, and I've never really done that, but I mean, it's not really any different than what I did when I worked at Walters, so what the hell, how bad can it be? You know, and, you know, so pricing the job was a challenge. I had to, you know, I had to figure out, what does it really cost? You know, how many people do I need? You know, all of these overhead expenses, which were a huge challenge that I never really thought of. And I just, like, walked through it. It was like, you know, walking through it with concrete on my feet, but I walked through it. And, you know, after we were halfway through that, we lost, excuse my language, but probably a shitload of money on that, but it was a learning experience. And after I finished that job, I was like, I can pretty much do anything now. I mean, you could stab me in the throat and I'll be still alive like next week, because nothing can be worse than that. But that's essentially what led me. I mean, it's was like this, but I really had no idea that I was going to be where I am now. If you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, no, yeah.
This might bridge from that question. And I just thoroughly enjoyed seeing this presentation. It naturally raises the question of how this school might bridge and might make this work possible, quite directly and naturally. So the question question is about, let's imagine there's complete enthusiasm for the picture practice and the art you just painted.
Right.
But there are certain crafts and poetries existing now, some latent, some already happening,
Yep.
and other things that need to be brought in. What would you suggest? Like, what are the conditions? What are the things that are already happening, and what are the next steps that you think that could happen, and where could this school get some traction here? It's not some things will.
Oh, that's dangerous. Okay, so yeah.
Some stuff can happen too. So.
Yes, and I think so. I think the answer to that is extremely broad and extremely focused. So the broad answer is that you need to focus because our education is actually very good at giving us exposure to a lot of different things. So what I would say is that an architectural education at the school right now allows you to explore and broaden your, I'm not going to say mastering, but discovery, let's say, of a number of topics, and the range is quite broad. But, you know, what I'm talking about, I think, or what I just talked about rather, is kind of both understanding that, but also focusing very closely on a very specific aspect of all of that. And so I would say that the answer to that question is probably a much more difficult answer than one might think, in that having taught here and understanding what the limitations are on the sponges that sit in front of me, right? At some point they become oversaturated and they just refuse to absorb moisture. Is that in an undergraduate level, I think it's very, very difficult to get to the level of detail that you might want to actually get to in order to actually really get into it. I think, yes, it can be done, but I think that what needs to happen is that it needs to be in more a focused studio setting, like the sorts of experimental studios and things I've been seeing where there are studios, I'm not sure which one I saw, maybe it was 3B or 4 something, where, you know, they're starting to kind of split off into veins onto certain topics within studio, because I think without a doubt it cannot be a second to studio event. It can't be in support. It needs to be the studio. Like, it has to be the focus. So in that sense, at an undergraduate level, it needs to be a focus of some kind, and it needs to be studio, but perhaps it's one of those kind of very focused studios where it's like we're going to be dealing with the design and manufacturing to the level we get to machining and bolts at something that we can actually give or present a sense of scope that it can actually be absorbed in that sponge and not for naught. The other answer to that question is that, like me, I guess, in my master's, you could very well explore that, but it's different because you don't really have the opportunity to do something that is physical in that sense, right? Which is like the huge component to all of this is the seeing the cranes and harnesses of the guys on scaffolding and, you know, like the operator and all of these guys. Like, I mean, that is the experience, right? I mean, the things you draw and relative to, let's not even think about how they're made or milled, but how they're installed even. There is a huge understanding. So maybe perhaps that's, you know, you do that yourself as part of your studio or your exercise. Like, the studio is the team-based effort of everyone in that studio is working on that design and that milling and that understanding, and you physically erect the fruits of your labor and design as part of that studio. I mean, that would be phenomenal. That would be amazing, because there's nothing more than actually seeing that. I mean, and then kind of the two sides informing one another. I think that's, I don't know if that really answers the question or if that skirts around it or broadens it and defocuses, but that's kind of where I think it should go. And obviously, you got to have the faculty to then support that and encourage the discovery. So I think that's, what's that? Sorry.
Thank you to Mark for the fantastic lecture, and thank you for coming out to the Uncovered lectures.